Hello, this is Michelle, and today I'm going to show you how I went about creating this watercolor illustration of these little illustration scenes inside of Christmas tree light bulbs. So I actually started with this tracing paper and my sketch, and I tend to erase a lot before I'm happy with how an illustration looks, and I put down a lot of pencil marks that need to be erased ultimately. So I like to start on something that isn't my watercolor paper just to protect that 100% cotton. It doesn't take as well to eraser marks, and then the paint doesn't adhere as well. So here I am putting a little bit of pencil mark on the other side, and I'm just going to trace that on. And I wanted to do 3 light bulb illustrations, so this was super helpful just to have as like a template for each one. And so I'm going to trace that same bulb 3 times, and then I will have some consistency in my my light bulbs. And once I get all 3 of my lights positioned, I'm going to take this masking fluid, which is a great little tool, and I use like a brush, an old brush that I'm not going to use for watercolor because no matter how much I try to clean it, it just never gets all of this masking fluid off. So just use an old brush for that, but that's going to be on a Christmas tree, the lights, and so I'm actually going to let that dry so that when I put my Christmas tree paint down, I can, or the pine, the pine tree, I can sort of not have to dance around the light bulbs that I'm envisioning. Another thing that I sketched was a little mailbox. I was envisioning this as like the North Pole and like Santa getting letters. So I'm going to paint a little green mailbox with a Santa Claus hat on it. I thought that was easy enough to just draw directly onto the paper, so I just went ahead and did that. And then I mixed up a really, really light kind of blue gray that's going to be my base for the snow that is at the North Pole. And so you can see I'm kind of putting a very, very light, watery uh, blue gray, because snow isn't ever completely white, it's a little bit shaded like that. And then I'm taking that same color and I'm putting that around the brim of Santa's hat and as well as the ball. But I kind of did it in just like a little bit of a dabby way because I want the brim to look like sort of that white velvety look to it. So I didn't want it to be a super smooth application. And now I'm mixing up a couple of like different Christmassy greens for both the exterior and the interior of the mailbox. And because my Santa Claus hat brim there is still wet, I'm actually just going to start with the open part of the mailbox that's as far away from the wet paint. Because I don't want my paint to bleed in. Obviously the paint will follow wherever the water is. And sometimes you like blends, but not in this case. I want these things to be distinct. And there you can see I'm kind of tracing around the letter that's in the mailbox with that green color as well. And next up, that brim had time to dry, so I'm going to mix up a nice red, and that red will be the Santa's hat. So I'm going to put a first layer of that down. And once I get the first layer of the hat down, I'm also going to use that red on the mailbox pole or base, and I'm going to do sort of alternating red and white stripes because I want this to look a little bit like a candy cane. So I'm really kind of accentuating those Christmassy colors between the red and the green and the blue in this illustration. And lastly, I'm going to paint the base or the exterior of the mailbox itself now that sort of all the paint around it has dried. And I just envisioned that the interior of the mailbox would be a slightly different color. It might even be a little bit darker because of shadows. So I just sort of made sure that all of the paints were slightly different colors. All of the greens, I should say, were slightly different shades, just so that it looked sort of authentically real. And I like to add some details to illustrations that are somewhat realistic because I think that makes it get a little bit more of a playful kind of vibe. One other thing that I did with this, I'm not sure if I've done it at this point yet, but I definitely decided that I was going to put a little bit of a shadow underneath the Santa's hat there because I want Santa's hat to look like it's actually resting on the mailbox. And that's like just another way that you can add a little bit of realism. I haven't done it yet, but you'll see it appears pretty soon. But it's a great way to sort of like add some realism, even though it's like obviously a very illustrative piece of art. So at this point, I kind of lost a little bit of where I was in the frame as far as I was painting. But I'm actually just drawing the tops, where the light bulb attaches to the bulb and the wire on the other two bulbs. And I'm also sketching out the wire that will run along all three of the bulbs, but unfortunately you can't really quite see it because I was not aware of that I was off of like the filming, so I apologize for that. And then at this point, I opted to do the last illustration inside that middle bulb because I was kind of waiting for my mailbox paint to dry. So I said, well, this is about as good a time as any to sketch that little snowman in. And, again, I didn't do the same thing that I did with the light bulbs where I had, sketched it out onto scrap paper and transferred it over. You know, uh, snowman's pretty easy to sketch, right? It's just sort of like these lumpy shapes and a little hat, and so there's not really too much to mess up there and not too much erasing. And here I am just like lightening up my pencil marks because I don't like my pencil to show through. And because he's a snowman, he's going to be mostly white or just very light. So and there I'm reminding myself of like what color I want to paint each one of the bulbs. So I decided to do red on the Christmas tree, green on the snowman, and then blue on this mailbox one. And oh, there you can see I've sort of corrected how I have my camera overhead. So at this point, I added a lot of water to around the illustration. I'm careful not to touch too much of the paint that's already down because I don't, that's one of the problems with watercolor that is different from acrylic is that if you can reactivate the paint on the page with water. So I don't want there to be any kind of blending between these reds and these greens and this blue. So I'm careful as I was painting not to reactivate the paint. So you have to be pretty delicate with your brush and pretty careful. And that's just one of the things that's a little bit different if you're new to this medium but are maybe familiar with other mediums to paint with. You've got to really be mindful about not activating the paint. So I'm adding a little bit more blue because it's a little bit more sky blue than I wanted. So I think I put a little more indigo into this just to deepen the color. so that it looks a little bit more like a Christmas blue as opposed to a sky blue. Again, this is just my envisioning of the North Pole, so I'm not really wanting this to be a true sky blue, right? So I just kind of kept adding some color in, and just because it is wet, the paint is wet, there's like a lot of water there, it's just blending really, really nicely, and it's allowing me to play around with the colors, adding a little bit more of a darker hue and stuff. And so you can see I'm just kind of dropping it in, and it's not creating any harsh lines. And that's kind of the nice part about wet into wet with watercolor. Okay, so a little bit of catch up because I forgot to hit the record button for these last two parts. So I am waiting for a few things to dry, but in the meantime, I removed all of that art masking fluid with an eraser, and you can see that it left all those really nice unpainted circles on that Christmas tree. I also went in with that same color that I used for the snow on the mailbox. I used the same color for the snowman just to kind of give him a little bit of texture and depth. And I also painted a red scarf on him and a little bit of a red sash on his stovepipe hat. And that was really just to kind of keep going with that theme of green and red. And so I've obviously waited for all of those parts of this illustration to dry before I'm putting the green on the backing. So yeah, just a kind of a similar approach that I used to creating the snow in the mailbox scene is what I used for the snowman. But I did kind of treat it like there was a light source, so you can see um, on one side of the snowman, it's a little bit more, you can see the color a little bit more, and actually in between the sections of the snowman, you can see that color as well. And so I was, trying to sort of show that. So I've put in a light a very watered down version of this green, and now that allows me, while the paint is still wet, to just kind of keep building it up. So I'm adding more color as I go, and just like with the blue bulb, I can really experiment, and as long as the paint stays wet, I can really experiment and just sort of keep adding to like the consistency and the depth of the color without getting harsh lines, right? Because the paint is just going to go wherever the water is. So if I just keep adding um, like a darker or a heavier consistency of paint, it's just going to add, a darker hue there. I'm going to get a darker shade, which you see happening now. So I really like that approach. And then the last thing I'm doing on the Christmas tree is I'm just adding some lights. So I was envisioning just like the standard strand where you'd have yellow, blue, red, and green. And once I finish adding all of these colors in, um, I'm going to add a little bit of white gouache to the center just to give them a sense of like the light kind of shining, because I think in the center of the light is the brightest part and you're seeing sort of the color radiate around. So I'm just kind of putting a little bit of water down, adding in my colors, and letting the color expand out into where I put the water down for these lights. And then I'll adjust a little bit more with that white gouache. So I'm going to wait for things to dry on my Christmas tree, and I'm going to add a little bit of this very, very watered down black to be where the wire and the Christmas tree, it's like the base of the light, I guess, where, and the same thing that I mentioned before about the snowman, where you can see there's like a clear light source. I want to have on the left side of that bulb, I want there to be like a little bit of a lighter black, kind of like what you saw I did with the mailbox version as well. So um, while I'm waiting for that to dry, I'm going to add a little bit more of the black where the stove pipe hat, I think that's what it's called. I'm going to add that to the top of him because obviously the green in the background has already dried, so I don't have to worry about the colors running together. And I'm also going to need to finish his face as well. So one of the things that you can kind of see me doing in this painting is like working efficiently. While I wait for one area to dry, I can work in another area. So I'm waiting for those light bulbs to dry. I can go back to um, my little snowman here and kind of finish the little finishing touches on him of like adding in his, sticks for his arm and adding in his face and his hat. So, yeah, so now you see me going back and I'm going to lift up some of that black paint just to get like a little bit of a reflection towards the top, in the same way that I have on my mailbox illustration there that's already dried. And now I'm going to go in again with that snow color and add in a little bit of shadow for the snow. And, you know, I kind of in some places maybe did it too much. Like you can definitely see in the mailbox, I would have liked to have had a little bit less snow, but that's something I can fix with white gouache. It's kind of like my fix all. Okay, so same thing as the other two light bulbs. I'm adding in a bunch of water and then I go in with my paint color. Now this one's a little bit trickier because I have those, the way a pine tree is with like the pine needles. It's kind of touchy to have to go in and paint around. So what you'll see me doing is moving my paper around to just make it a little bit easier on myself. And I'm trying to get as much in there in between the branches, but in areas where I can't, it's like, well, oh well. I don't want to reactivate the paint on the tree, and then I'm going to end up with like a mess between the red and the green mixing. So I'm just doing the best I can to get up as close to the tree as possible and the tree branches as possible without, you know, really having the paint reactivated and then just kind of like a muddy mess on my page. So here's a little trick. I made a mistake, as you can see, next right there on that bulb, I went a little too far over. And fortunately, I noticed it in time. And if you just take a very sort of dry, clean piece of paper towel like I did and just blot it up, you usually can fix that. Red, it can be sort of a touchy color. It is very staining as opposed to some of the other colors. So you can see maybe there's like still a little bit of a stain there, but I think for the most part, I pulled it up, and you can see I avoided that for a little while because I want to make sure that that area is completely dry. So just in case I don't want the red to go out there again, if that makes sense. Because if it's not dry, the paint is just going to follow it. So yeah, I'm just kind of being a little bit careful with that. And again, I'm just kind of like dabbing around that tree just to make sure I'm not like really scrubbing over the tree branches because that would really activate that green paint that has already dried. At this point, while I'm waiting for all of that to dry on the tree bulb illustration, I thought, you know what? I'd like to try to play around with a few things. Sketching out Happy Holidays. I put Santa on in like very light writing on the piece of mail that's in the mailbox at my version of the North Pole. And so, yeah, that just kind of again trying to work smart and be efficient with my time while I'm waiting for things to dry. So you can kind of see that that red bulb is still pretty wet, and because it's still shiny, I'm kind of like tapping it a little bit, and it's just still a little too damp for me to try to add the top of that bulb there. So but I am fixing to do something, so I'm adding a little bit of a top at the top of each one of those like bulb handles where the wire is gonna add up. I'm sorry, where the wire is gonna kind of link up with the bulb, and I'll even do that on the tree light so that once I finish painting this part. And then here I go with the wires. I'm just kind of like doing just kind of a zany little black line there with loops in it, just like how your light wires get kind of like messy and looped around. So I thought that was kind of like a fun aspect of the illustration. And then while I'm still waiting for things to dry, I decided to bring out my metallic set of paints. And I have a really nice gold paint that I can use to go over those Happy Holidays lettering. I love using gold and silvers at the holidays, and you saw a flash of my metallic watercolor set. So I just activated that with a little bit of spray, and I'm going to get some gold on my actual, yeah, let me put that more in view of you. And then I can just trace over with a paintbrush my Happy Holidays text. So I generally tend to try to write things out first in pencil just to get this spacing right and so that it kind of looks I don't know how I'd like it to look. I don't really love this because I didn't quite have as much room as I would have liked to like make my H's. It's not the end of the world. I did end up digitizing this, and I turned it into a card. And I've got a tutorial that I will do how I used Procreate to digitize and turn this into a card. But I completely got rid of this lettering when it came down to it. I wasn't in love with it. I mean, I think it worked well enough just for a kind of like fun illustration like this, and it looks cute and homemade, but for something, a little bit more professional, which I try to get with my digitized versions of art, I ended up kind of completely changing how I did this, which I think I should have that tutorial coming out at the end of this week. And I think that'll be hopefully a useful one. I've never really done too much on digital art as far as the as far as like actually doing tutorials on it. So hopefully it's useful. Okay, so I'm pretty sure that this red has finally been, dried and everything, so I can add the top of the light bulb in like how I have the other two, and that kind of gives a little bit of finality to my piece. And so, like I said, ultimately, I added in some white gouache to the center of each one of those lights on the Christmas tree. And I put some white gouache like around the sides, kind of following the curve of the light bulbs themselves, just to give like a sense of reflection and brightness for the lights. And you'll see that in sort of my finishing. I guess I didn't hit record for that either. So yeah, there's my finished product. You can see the little bit of a glow that you get for the light bulbs. And so I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you learned something, and please hit like and subscribe if you'd like to see more. Thanks.